On one side, it's like a vacation during war, using canned luncheon meat to polish shoes. On the other, every meal includes Western food and wine, with desserts and snacks available at will. Today, we're not talking about weapons or equipment. We're diving into the topic of rations, specifically the wartime food of American and Japanese troops during World War II. Which country's army had the best food during World War II? Without a doubt, it was the United States, the world's most powerful nation at the time. While many countries rationed their military supplies, strictly limiting meat, eggs, and dairy, focusing solely on keeping soldiers fed, the American side was almost like a vacation. They ate the best food available. Supplies were abundant on the front lines and the rear lines. No limits at all. Soldiers could eat as much as they wanted. American pampered soldiers even used canned luncheon meat as shoe polish. They'd fill auxiliary fuel tanks of fighter planes with milk and cocoa powder, fly to high altitudes, and make ice cream at 30,000 feet. Globally, American troops consumed a staggering 1 billion bottles of Coca-Cola and 6,000 tons of ice cream annually during the war. Such lavish rations were a testament to the country's immense economic power, a crucial factor that helped the U.S. win the Pacific War despite early disadvantages. Now, let's take a closer look at the food standards for American troops in World War II. Since soldiers stationed in the rear could eat without restriction, those meals aren't very representative. Instead, we'll focus on the frontline rations, which were categorized into 5 main types: A, B, C, D, and K. Type A rations were garrison rations, consisting of fresh, refrigerated, or frozen foods. They could be served at field kitchens near the front lines or at military bases with professional dining facilities. These were the most favored meals among U.S. soldiers. Type A rations included virtually every kind of food you can imagine: bread, biscuits, roasted potatoes, and other staples, roast chicken, steak, fried eggs, bacon, and organ meats, fruits like oranges, bananas, and lemons, condiments such as butter, jam, coffee, and milk, plus a wide variety of vegetables. Basically, if Americans ate it at home, it was in the rations. The ingredients were either airlifted from the rear or locally sourced near their stations. Type B rations were field rations, consisting of prepackaged uncooked foods, usually stored in cans, cartons, or small packets. Like Type A rations, they typically required preparation by field kitchens and trained cooks. It often took 2 cooks 2 to 3 hours to prepare a Type B meal for 100 soldiers. The advantage of Type B rations was their ability to provide balanced nutrition in all weather conditions. They could also be supplemented with fresh foods as they became available, preventing monotony. Type C rations were individual rations made up of canned, ready-to-eat foods. When neither A nor B rations were available and survival rations ran low, soldiers turned to Type C rations. Each Type C ration included 3 12-ounce, 340-gram meat cans, typically containing vegetable stews, beans with meat, sausages, or macaroni, 3 12-ounce staple cans, usually high-calorie biscuits, sugar wafers, instant coffee, or chocolate, and an accessory pack with candies or condiments. Type C rations balance calories, nutrition, and taste. Type D rations were emergency rations, essentially high-calorie chocolate bars. Interestingly, the U.S. military deliberately made these bars taste awful to discourage soldiers from eating them as snacks. Type K rations were a lighter version of Type C, offering smaller portions and fewer options. Even as a low-budget version, American rations would have been highly prized in any other army. In fact, the canned luncheon meat Americans considered unappealing later became a celebrated ingredient in Korea's famous army stew. While Americans enjoyed gourmet meals, what were their Japanese counterparts eating? The dietary standards of the Japanese Army and Navy during World War II were vastly different. Let's first discuss the Navy, which fought against American forces in the Pacific. The Navy's meals were notably luxurious, surpassing even those of European navies at the time. The basic daily allocation for each sailor included 1 kilogram of rice, 180 grams of meat, 50 grams of fish, and 300 grams of vegetables. While these numbers may not seem extravagant on paper, the actual meals served were far more enjoyable. For example, a Navy officer's breakfast might include dried fish, seaweed, miso soup, pickled vegetables, and white rice. If they preferred a Western-style breakfast, they could inform the service staff a day in advance to have items like coffee and oatmeal prepared in the style of an English breakfast. Lunch was a full Western course meal, served in a specific order: soup, fish, and then meat. Regardless of the weather, high-ranking officers were required to wear jackets and adhere to British table etiquette during meals. Fleet commanders dined privately, attended by service staff, and occasionally hosted other high-ranking officers for meals in the officers' mess. Dinner typically featured Japanese cuisine, including sashimi, pickled vegetables, grilled fish, steamed eggs, and miso soup. Depending on the ship's location, regional dishes, such as lobster and snapper, might also be served. After dinner, officers who were still hungry could request extra rice, and the kitchen would often prepare an additional pot to accommodate these requests, sometimes adding poached eggs and soy sauce for a second round of dinner. While the meals for ordinary sailors were less extravagant than those for officers, they were still far superior to the Army's rations. Sailors frequently enjoyed Western-style dishes like pork cutlets, creamy chicken stew, and beef curry. Traditional Japanese fare included miso soup, fish, and pickled vegetables, with rice mixed with barley or brown rice to prevent beriberi caused by a diet of only polished white rice. These standards were just the norm during peacetime. During wartime, the Navy's rations improved even further, with ample supplies of meat, eggs, and dairy. Additionally, Navy personnel earned higher salaries, enabling them to purchase extra snacks and meals. On board the battleship Yamato, for example, food reserves ranged from 100 to 300 tons, stored in pantries scattered throughout the vessel. The Navy employed top chefs recruited from high-end restaurants and luxury cruise ships to prepare gourmet meals for the crew. The Yamato was equipped with food production machines, including ones for making ice cream and soda, allowing for treats that were otherwise unavailable during wartime. A small store on board sold snacks and beverages, such as toasted bread, pancakes, sweets, milk candy, yokan sweet bean jelly, biscuits, sake, beer, soda, and cigarettes. This abundance earned the Yamato the nickname Yamato Hotel. Even during the later stages of the war, when resources became scarce, the Navy's food supplies remained relatively consistent due to the decreasing number of personnel. In stark contrast to the Navy's lavish dining standards, the Army's rations were meager to the point of being called miserable. The specifics of their humble meals will be discussed next. The standard daily ration for the Japanese Army consisted of 660 grams of rice, 200 grams of barley, 200 grams of raw meat, 600 grams of vegetables, 60 grams of pickles. Additionally, soldiers were supplied with various seasonings, tobacco, and alcohol. At first glance, this seemed comparable to what the Navy received. However, when it came to the actual variety of food, the Army's provisions paled in comparison to those of the Navy. Moreover, this level of rations represented the pre-war maximum standard. Before initiating the war in 1931, Japan stockpiled a significant amount of supplies. These food standards were based on the assumption of a quick and decisive victory. But as the war dragged on and supplies were nearly depleted, combined with the cessation of trade with the United States, the Army's food rations were drastically reduced. Meat became increasingly scarce, and seasonings were supplied sporadically before disappearing altogether. The decline in Army rations was most evident in their canned beef. Initially, the canned beef was plentiful, of high quality, and well received internationally. Over time, however, the quality diminished. The meat content decreased, evolving from chunks of beef to ground meat, and eventually to powdered meat. Even so, the Army could not maintain a stable supply of canned beef. In response, They introduced a variety of odd canned meats, including rabbit, horse, fish, and even whale meat. By the later stages of the war, the primary ingredients in Army canned meat were reduced to cow's blood and rotten fish. These substandard rations were so poor that even Chinese soldiers, who themselves faced significant shortages, scorned the low-quality meat. If this doesn't clearly illustrate the disparity between the Army's and Navy's rations, consider the following examples. In 1942, one of the Japanese Army's top strategists, Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, boarded the Navy's flagship Yamato to coordinate with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto on joint Army-Navy operations in Southeast Asia. Tsuji, a colonel, spoke to Admiral Yamamoto in a manner that could only be described as audacious, which irritated Yamamoto. In response, Yamamoto sent Tsuji to dine in the officers' mess hall, where he was served the lowest-grade curry rice. To Yamamoto's surprise, Tsuji was moved to tears by the meal. Afterward, Tsuji personally apologized to Yamamoto, admitting that his earlier behavior had been inappropriate. He expressed profound gratitude for being treated to such high-quality food despite the Army-Navy rivalry, leaving him deeply ashamed. Contrast this with another example during the Pacific War. Several Navy aircraft, damaged during combat, were forced to land at an Army airfield. The Army soldiers extended a warm welcome to the Navy pilots, offering them a meal. However, upon seeing the meager and crude rations, the Navy pilots became furious, believing the Army was mocking them. When they learned that this was actually the Army's highest-grade meal, their anger turned to tears of pity. They were profoundly relieved that they hadn't been assigned to the Army. This stark contrast in rations gave rise to the saying, "The Navy eats meat, while the Army eats grass." That's all for today's video. Are you curious about the wartime rations of other nations? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your support and see you in the next video.